the acceleration manager, and my team today are joined with us in the room. So we have Gavin Maitland, we have Nicola McCluskey, and Claire Torring. Well, I'm hoping over the next, obviously the directors in the room as well. I'll take questions today. Please ask Niall about. So I had anticipated this probably around 45 minutes, but the video, I have a couple of things that might extend the length of it. But anyway, what I wanted to do, and the purpose you're all here for today, is to give you a bit of background context, the Cluster Acceleration Programme that we launched back in October with Minister Murphy. And I want to give you a bit of an insight to the support that that programme provides, and then how that might apply to your clients. But I really also wanted to give you some context about how the Cluster Acceleration Programme evolved, and also make sure that you're familiar with how it aligns and demonstrates with our Alliance with Strategic Fit, and highlight the benefits of clustering, that word clustering, and share with you as well some global best practice, and also showcase maybe some of the local case studies that maybe we've had the opportunity to work with. So as I said, it's 45 minutes. I do appreciate some of you have to leave by 11 o'clock. So even if in 15 minutes, and some of you feel I'm not wanting to listen anymore, I'm happy enough for you to move. But thank you very much. I really do appreciate your time. So I have a couple of videos included in this, so you don't have to listen the whole 45 minutes either. So just some of you may be aware of the programme evolution or not, but this has been evolving since 2016. So we have been, since 2007, we have been supporting groups of companies to work with stakeholders in the ecosystem since then. And it has been an evolution and an iteration. So we had the Collaborative Network Programme, then with the Collaborative Growth Programme, and now with the Cluster Acceleration Programme. Since 2016, the team has supported some 62 collaborative projects, and they have engaged with some 700 companies, and they have also engaged with over 300 stakeholders. The outcome of those projects as well in that period of time for our investment of 3.2 million, leveraged £6 million across several of those projects. So we know as well, as a result of that work, that several of those projects that we have funded are now what we would deem as emerging clusters. And that is what we are building on, and hopefully then the next iteration programme will hopefully tap into that critical mass of companies we've got already working together. But before I begin, they always say there's no such thing as free lunch. So in this instance, there's no such thing as free sweeties. And I know we've got a room of experts in the room, a lot of brain power in the room. And for me, I want to use that today. It isn't necessarily a workshop, but for those of you who know me know that I like doing workshops. So I just want to ask this one question first of all, and then I have another two questions. But what I do want to do is, you have a piece of paper on your desk, you have a pen. I would like you to take a piece of paper and a pen each. Don't do it just this minute. But there are some ground rules here for these questions. I do not want to see anybody Googling on their phone or sneaking onto the desk to try and find the answer to this. And there is no, it's the exam question that I'm not marking you really on. But I do just want to get a sense of what is the thinking in the room. So first question that I want, not even more than 1 minute, really, you should just have this off the top of your head. Do not confer, Tom. This is one to do individual. So what I want you to do is, on that piece of paper, just write what you believe is. And I need to collect these, by the way, at the end, folks, that we need it to help inform us. What is a cluster? No.
Guarantee you that if I'm at the table.
No trouble. All done? Maybe get some patience out of this paper roll. Okay. So in your groups at your table, then spend another minute or so discussing these two questions and writing down your understanding from the discussion of what do you believe might drive the performance of a cluster and how might clusters accelerate economic development. I just want initial thoughts. Discuss your table and just give me your initial thoughts. Yes, but right, what you think the discussion is. That makes sense? So, quick discussion at your table, what might drive the performance of a cluster?
As a financial, yeah, probably the end of it.
What's the thing?
Would say right here.
It has to be. Something's already in it.
There we go. Right that out.
Shared there.
No, we're not. No, it's me. We're right.
There you go. Chad Lennon. Works there.
I told Matt, you know.
We've seen this presentation.
Structured approach.
Vision.
It's all the right word.
Picture.
Well, and then what was that over there?
And don't forget to write
It's also like.
down on the piece of paper the answer to those questions.
Even though it's.
Doing your job for you here.
Okay.
Keep it at 45
You've done
minutes.
well.
We see
Like
that
the resources and the technical.
The benefit.
Yeah.
Negative here. It's right. You have to leave that. So that part.
there's not necessarily.
What objectives?
Yeah.
That's it.
Just, yeah.
Yeah, it's a different story.
Even industry with Ireland.
Such a strong compelling market. Whatever collaboration it's done. Private equity, you know.
Third question.
How are we getting on?
Organization and all.
Couple- Another 1 more minute? That be enough? 1 more minute?
Reduce their carbon. So again, they're all working with jobs. They think it's.
The one with the flag.
You have to. Also.
Hey, is that? Do you? Five. I got it. No, I can make five.
No, we do.
Each other. Optimizing. It's third.
He was delivered. I don't know if you actually.
Next, bring in the last. Good job. Common to them. But otherwise, you can get each other.
It's so.
Yeah, there's some difference.
We need each other.
Where's the other?
But they do have options. There is.
Okay, try and finish.
Should call them better.
Choose a teacher.
These steam coming out of Sharon's.
Collaborating, working together. Yeah.
Watching someone. And then you just stand up and get out, start off. Give them that sort of
Okay, have you all got something down? Response to both of those questions? I think some of you might have been at an unfair advantage because I can see some people that actually diploma and cluster competitiveness maybe helping out at some of the tables. So, just know, how hard, difficult was that in answering those questions on a scale of 1 to 10?
Oh, we haven't got the answers yet, so.
Well, that's a fair point. Scale of 1 to 10. Anybody want?
Moira thought it was done, but I thought it was right.
I thank you for doing that because I do want to get the information well to help inform our future. But how many of you, I'm just curious to know, how many of you in your definition, what is a cluster, use the word sector? Oh,
Like that, and what I saw in the market. Yeah.
okay. So I suppose for me as well, this is one of my frustrations in this role in this world. A lot of people and colleagues will use word sector and clusters interchangeably. And our colleagues in the department well have got documents and they are using the word sectors and clusters in the same sentence. And that actually can cause confusion and actually does not help the role in which we are trying to do. So one of the reasons why I did that was because we want to get a sense of what is the level of understanding and actually what else do we need to do to try and actually improve and help educate and inform people as well. And make sure that everybody realises the difference between sectors, clusters and how they individually contribute to economic growth. So for me, I thought this would be a useful way as well to actually help clarify the difference between sectors and clusters. And in particular, the thing that you really need to look at is around this in terms of the collaboration that we talk about, where a sector is loose connection between firms in the same sector, but where a cluster is intense localized collaboration and co-opetition. And for us as well, that I do appreciate there are colleagues who work in the sector teams, and you are very clear of the definition of what a sector is. But for us as well, the other thing really to look at is that whole geographical proximity. So in terms of a sector, it's not necessarily bound by geography, but a cluster is concentration of companies that are in a proximity. Now, in saying that, Northern Ireland is such a small place. So in relation to the rest of the world, Northern Ireland, the geographical proximity is that closely bound. We're 2 hours reach. So that in itself is something that of note. But we also know in terms of sectors and clusters as well, that there is less innovation that actually takes place, in around that whole sector, but actually high innovation happens when you get companies to work collectively together. Clusters for us are geographical concentrations of a variety of industries, related knowledge, spillovers, and their skills and inputs, demands, and our linkages. Clusters, they have to engage industry, academia, government, entrepreneurs and investors in our world. So they do help people to pool resources, and they also spark ideas, innovation. And they are a mix of large and small companies, which is critical as well for us. They normally start as well or evolve from the bottom up, and they have common goals. And they work together to help each other succeed. I don't necessarily want to give you here today a full academic lesson on this, but I did think for me the challenge is around the fact of making sure that everybody is aware of what we are talking about when we are talking about a cluster acceleration programme and the ingredients that we would expect to see. But I don't want you just to take my word for it. Some of you might have been at the conference that we held back in October, but I did want to play this. It's a 10-minute video, and it actually talks about the DNA of clusters. And this is from Professor Christian Kettles, who was from Harvard Business School and worked very closely with Michael Porter, who a lot of you will know, and has now moved to the World Bank. So I thought I would play this, if technology works, for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back to the programme.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, and Linda also for getting me here. It was actually December
It's not really.
2016. And I remember very well because it was a lovely event in a fantastic setting in the Titanic Museum. We had a very good time, but it was also a start of quite a difficult period. Difficult period not only for the UK and Northern Ireland, but for many European economies. For you, of course, Brexit had quite a lot to do with it, but then it was followed by COVID. It was followed more recently by the increase in inflation and the energy prices that all you and your companies have to deal with. This is an environment that made it not easier for companies. It didn't make it easier for clusters either. But what I want to argue is that it made it even more important for you to work in cluster structures. Because, and we heard some examples of that in that little video that we just watched, because the changes that we're facing are so fundamental that it is impossible for an individual company or an individual research institution to succeed and prepare itself for that new future if it is not collaborating with others. We are in a time of a lot of change and uncertainty, but it will be impossible to succeed in that period if we are not creating new types of linkages and collaborations. For you to succeed individually as companies, but also for Northern Ireland to figure out what is your value proposition. That was one of the key questions that we discussed at that time in 2016. After Brexit, what is the key reason for why companies would want to come here? What are the key assets and capabilities that Northern Ireland offers in the context of the UK, in the context of Europe, and in the context of the global economy? So what I want to do this morning is sort of trying to give you, hopefully, sort of a shared language to start collaborating in these cluster structures. Talk a little bit about what we mean by clusters, what the research has found, why it is actually important, both for societies and communities, but also for individual companies. I want to talk a little bit about what we've learned from cluster-based economic development experience. And I can tell you, we've seen quite a lot of successes, and we have some of the leading regions here, Austria, we have the Basque Country, we have Norway, we have other colleagues with us today. But we also had to learn from a lot of failures. Just by calling something a cluster or cluster effort is not a guarantee for success. It's a starting point, it opens the door. But it then depends on what you decide to do together. And I want to try to give you a little bit of a toolkit to think about what you can do in that common structure. So what is at the heart of the cluster idea? Again, it's not always people understand that the research, the modern research on clusters that Michael Porter started now a couple of decades ago, was not driven by a sort of economic motivation to try to understand why some locations were doing better than others. It was actually driven by the attempt to understand why it was that successful companies in many industries happened to not be distributed across space sort of randomly, but actually concentrated in specific places. This is not as obvious as it might look to you as you look at the reality of your economies. Because economists would usually argue that as we are competing with each other, we want to be far away from each other. We don't want to be close to these other rivals. But in fact, that's what we observed. Now, when then Porter started his research and many others in the field over the years, what is it that we found that really sort of drives these type of locations that enable high performance in individual companies and strong clusters to emerge? One aspect is what's called here related variety. And I think this is very important to understand. Some people think that clusters is just about sort of economies of scale. You're getting good at something because you're doing a lot of it. So there was this one town in China, I think, that at one point produced 80% of all buttons of the world. They were pretty good at doing buttons. But this is actually not what clusters are about. Clusters are about these networks of related and supporting industries, these ecosystems of specialists that contribute to your company's value chain and allow you to focus on what you are distinctively good at doing. So it's much more like a puzzle. Good clusters are characterized by being similar enough to each other to be relevant, but also different enough to each other to actually be complementary. I think this idea is still very relevant, and as we see a little bit later, it also means that what constitutes your cluster is changing all the time. Because as technology changes, what is relevant to you and your success will change. It's one of the dangers for policymakers that we are sometimes too static. We sort of define the box and say, this is cluster ABC, and you are not. Well, companies actually have realized that, no, this other supplier now all of a sudden, or this material provider becomes very important because there's technology change. Proximity. Sounds like a very outdated idea. Many of you will have business partners, you will source technology, you will maybe hire people from locations far away. So why is it that proximity, location, place, being close to each other still matters? I think the way that Mike Porter put it was that we have to stop thinking about local and global as alternatives and think more about it as complements. Being in a strong cluster doesn't mean that you stop connecting globally. Actually, the opposite. But the connections that you have globally are something that all of your rivals in other locations can match. If you have the supplier in China, for example, your competitor from France will be able to have that same connection. But if you have a partner, a research institute, or a service provider close by in your location, that type of interaction is something that other rivals in another locations can't match the same way. So in that sense, a cluster is much more strategic because it makes you unique. It makes you different in ways that companies in other locations can't match. Clusters are about linkages, so we have to think about the way that we organize and live these linkages. Policymakers, and especially in Europe, often focus quite a bit on this part, on the collaboration. And this is also how usually the government programs are designed. How do you ensure collective action? How do you make sure that people get to know each other and then work together? And that is absolutely important because it doesn't just happen automatically. Collaborating is difficult. Working with other cultures, with other organizations, with other individuals. But I think what the US experience has also taught us is that collaboration and rivalry have to be balanced. Clusters are not a consortium. Dynamic clusters are structures that are open to new ideas. They are open to that crazy entrepreneur that comes up with these different ideas on how to do things. And that is what's driving their success. So as you think about your networks, make sure that you collaborate well and really use that efficiency that you gain by knowing each other well and have structures to do that. But never forget that you always have to also be open to these new ideas, especially in a type of rapid technological change. And then finally, in the middle is critical mass. We know that these effects of clusters sort of follow what we like to call an S curve. So at the beginning, you add a little bit more and the effects are not very visible. But as you create more size, the benefits of these clusters are starting to really rocket up. We have to be realistic what a small cluster can do. It's still a good starting point. It's important to collaborate at that level. but the economy-wide effects will come from a few clusters that really reach this type of critical mass. Now, one example that I've worked quite a bit with is biopharmaceuticals in Boston. I'll actually come back to that. But I wanted to focus on two aspects of this. One is, as you see here, all these different boxes.
I would need to stop.
It's not
Yeah, I'm okay. All right, apologies. Thank you for indulging me there and let me play that for 10 minutes. But I thought it was really important from the point of view of hearing from a global expert about the DNA of clusters, and also trying to help put in context what it is that we are trying to do to support the evolution of emerging clusters within Northern Ireland. And I think also it demonstrates too the fact that how critical it is that we make sure that those clusters that we are supporting going forward leverage and link the assets that we've got in Northern Ireland and sweat those assets that we've got in Northern Ireland to make sure that we ensure that that stickiness and that we have that competitive edge. And that's where the City and Growth deals, the institutions, the universities and colleges that work in collection in collaboration with the SME community is critical. I would urge you as well, if you're interested in this, to actually watch the rest of that. It's 45 minutes long, so I didn't want to, play the whole video today. You might want to watch it as an alternative to bedtime reading, I don't know. But the other slides that are the other videos that are on that link as well are all case studies from our cluster conference that we had back in October. And there are a lot of examples from the Norwegian offshore cluster. There's an example from the FinTech cluster and an example from the Basque region from the advanced manufacturing sector. They were all recorded and they're all available for you as well to watch. But in Christian's presentation, one of the things that really did resonate with me, if we had to play it a wee bit longer, and I wanted to draw your attention to this, is around some of the really interesting stats that actually now that they've realised that clusters drive economic activity and performance. But one of them in particular that I do want to draw your attention to, considering that we are about productivity, is that the evidence out there is that firms in clusters achieve 30% higher productivity than those located elsewhere. They may improve 30% in terms of productivity. That does not mean to say, mind you, that they are more profitable. But I think it's interesting to see that even, the evidence from the European panorama in those stats as well, that, employment in those sectors agglomerate or concentrated in clusters. So I did want to share that with you, and his definition again, to just reiterate around clusters or geographical concentration of a variety of industries that are related by knowledge, skills, inputs, demands, and other linkages. He does share other case studies as well in that presentation. But for me as well, one of the things I thought that I would share, and I did say this wasn't going to be an academic lecture, anything else, but over the last few years, it's definitely been a paradigm shift. And I do want to share this with you, and it is in relation to that shift from the old fashioned triple helix that Michael Porter developed some 20 years ago, which really focused on a cluster was where government, industry and academic institutions work collectively together. That is deemed now by the gurus and the practitioners as, and the new model is that one that we are talking about, that the academic institutions of Harvard and MIT have actually developed a framework and have built in and recognised the value of entrepreneurship and investors into a cluster model. And it's that actually now we are going from a triple helix to what they call as a pentagon model. So as Kevin would say on my team, you heard it here, folks, this is the direction of travel for clusters. We do need to make sure that we are actually embracing the fact that the role of investors and entrepreneurs will play in clusters. In terms of us as the Collaborative Growth Programme and in terms of us as the Collaborative Network Programme, it was the old model of the triple helix, but now in terms of the Cluster Acceleration Programme, we are definitely actively encouraging those clusters that we form and support to bring on board investors and entrepreneurs. So I did say to you that you were here to hear about the collaborative or the cluster. I needed cluster program. I needed to get my head into the cluster program, and really it was a very ambitious program, and it did take 2 years to go through evaluation and an economic appraisal, much so it was quite a challenge. But it was a challenge for various reasons. This was the first time ever as well that we were very ambitious and went after a 10-year funding round. And the evidence out there would say from the amount of work that we've done, and it was evident in the casework as well, that actually clusters take a long time to form and they cannot form within a cycle of 3 years. So we went for that 10-year window to actually make sure that we could build the critical mass, build those connections, leverage those relationships with all the stakeholders. So we did want to make sure that actually we were going to develop those competencies and capabilities in a number of areas as well. And we were delighted that we got approval for that £14 million programme, 11 million of grant. And really we are aligned and want to make sure that the programme does deliver good jobs, helps with productivity, and also helps to reduce the carbon emissions. That's all our targets. But more importantly, we have enough evidence as well to indicate that it will contribute to regional balance. So over the past 7 years, we have, as I said, worked with many clusters, emerging clusters. I'm even going to correct myself. So I thought what I would do is give a quick overview of just some of those. I didn't share all 60 projects with you. Some of you may be familiar with them. In fact, Nal and I met a month ago with somebody that actually was part of our original collaborative growth programme. And when we initially funded them to work together, and some people will be familiar with it, it was the European Connected Health Alliance. And that is one of the longest established initial networks that we funded. And it is a global organisation now. So it works internationally, and it is setting up clusters all over the globe in relation to connected health. But back to home and some of those projects and emerging clusters that we have funded. Some of you are familiar that this geographical concentration that we talk about, MEGA, is based in Dungannon, Mid-Ulster. GEMX in the advanced manufacturing space is based in Northwest. And the Maritime Offshore Network, NEMO, is mainly concentrated around Belfast Harbour. So we have been funding those now for some time. MEGA, the ambition bit originally when the companies came together, the problem they were trying to solve was on the skills agenda. They knew that actually for those companies to remain competitive, that they actually had to address skills shortage and the actual skills requirements that they had. And they worked collectively and tirelessly together with DFE and with the academic institutions, and they developed some of the things. In particular would be their apprenticeship programme, the MEGA apprenticeship programme, which is a key outcome, and that has been replicated across in other areas. But they have trained up people as ambassadors. They have grown from an initial group that actually was in the Dungannon Mid-Ulster area of companies of 32. They now have 100 companies associated. They are becoming self-sustaining. They don't just have one facilitator on board, they have now 6. They are actually leveraging funding and membership funding from the companies, and they are part of what we would see as being an emerging cluster, but more of that in a minute. GEMX is based in the Northwest, again tackling the skills in the Northwest advanced manufacturing sector, have a cohort of companies of some, I think, members that are saying their members, and Gavin will correct me in a minute, are some 32 companies in the Northwest who are working proactively together as well with the local colleges, councils, and our colleagues in the department, again, to try and help address the skills shortages in that area. But both MEGA and GEMX have realised that there's more they can do collectively together. So they are looking at actually working collectively in terms of productivity improvement and decarbonisation. And they are engaged with a lot of you that are in these areas across the organisation. And in fact, in terms of supply chain and lean, our colleagues in our teams and skills are actually working with those groups of companies to do something in that area. NEMO for us as well was actually looking at the opportunities in the offshore maritime sector. And the success of that is that's been a relatively short evolution of a group of companies, and Sharon and her team have been proactively involved in this from day one. But this has been happening and evolving for the past 3 years, whereas Nemo and GEMX maybe been evolving over the past 7 years. So Nemo accelerated a lot of this work, but they knew that coming down the track was the opportunities in maritime offshore. For us, the success of this, apart from the fact that the lead company is Artemis and they've extended their reach, brought more companies in, they have partnered as well with Maritime UK and have managed to leverage another £100,000 of funding from across the cross pond, was wrong terminal, but from Maritime UK. And actually, in terms of them setting up, they have now set up a formal organisation and have employed the facilitators full time in that role. They are really ambitious, and for us, they actually are helping even sector team around in terms of addressing some of the opportunities and needs, and they are a critical voice for that industry. But I didn't want to just leave that with me telling you that. I thought I would let you hear from Gavin Killeen, who is the actual lead company in GEMX, as to the benefits he has got from the support so far.
I'm Gavin Killeen, a Managing Director of Newprint Technologies. We're based in the Northwest. The GEMX network is generating engineering and manufacturing excellence across the Northwest City region. It's made up of over 30 companies, Ulster University, Northwest Regional College, and supported by Derry City and Strabane District Council. We've worked with many primary schools and post-primary schools across the region as part of that programme, and we actively work with multiple stakeholders and partners, raising the profile of advanced manufacturing and engineering within the Northwest City region and the whole of Northern Ireland. Every single one of the companies has a completely different need with regard to our skills, but there are core skills that we do need. We do need apprenticeships, we need engineering skills, we need mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, but most of our companies are too small to be able to have a voice whenever we articulate that need through to the college or the university. But collectively, when we come together, our voice is much stronger, and we're able to have courses and programs put in place that individually we never would be able to achieve. As a collective group, we've been able to work collaboratively with the Manufacturing Technology Centre in Coventry. We went through and saw some of the innovation ideas around Industry 4.0. We then formed a partnership with the MTC and looked at various lean manufacturing processes and activities that help the companies become more efficient and been able to adopt best practice lean manufacturing programs. So one of the great successes I would see of GEMX so far has been the Make Me program. We have partnered 5 of our companies up with 5 schools. Representatives from the companies go into each of those schools on a regular basis and present to those young people the multiple different pathways that there are into engineering. That could be through an apprenticeship program or a degree apprenticeship program that we've also introduced recently in Ulster University in electrical and electronical engineering. We had some help from branding companies, and we tried to sort of look at making a behaviour and cultural change within those companies that allowed them to look as what a blue chip company would look like. The benefit for Newprint, being part of the Collaborative Growth Programme, is that we've been able to critically look at ourselves from outside through the peer group. We've also been able to avail of many of the upskilling programs. We've had staff have gone on advanced manufacturing programs. Being able to piggyback off the back of the GEMX project has really allowed us to not quite accelerate in the short term, but certainly given us a path over the next 5 years of where we want to go and what we want to do and how we're going to embrace digitalization within our business. And for me personally, what I've really enjoyed is that coming and meeting with your peers to talk about those shared learnings and the shared problems. A problem shared is a problem halved. I believe companies together, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. There's absolutely no doubt about that, and I would actively encourage any other company who wants to become part of GEMX or to form any other collaborative network. It is the way forward.
So we know we've set up and we're aiming for an ambitious programme, and we know that actually our plan is that the programme will enable clusters to increase productivity. And we do hope then that we'll also look at helping to improve and attract additional jobs and provide opportunities in sectors. We also know that actually it will help distribute economic activities more evenly across the regions. I think that's what we're trying to demonstrate with some of those projects that we have supported, and definitely help those rural areas as well get engaged. But we've also to say that by working collectively to address decarbonisation targets as well, that companies are now looking at innovative ways of doing that and working collectively together. So specifically then on our programme, the Cluster Acceleration Programme objectives, I'm conscious as well, some of you need to go at 11, so I'll try to battle through these as well, but happy for you to go on if I'm still talking. So our programme is set up to address the market failure around SMEs' ability to collaborate and innovate. So we ultimately will hope that they will generate growth. We also want to deliver, as I say, against the economic vision, and we are focusing on those four areas, especially around job increasing and productivity. We do want to make sure the language we use is that we're developing improvements in human capital, social capital, intellectual capital. Those are all the things as well that we will be looking at delivering against, and they will be the impact measures that we will be working on as we go forward. The support in itself is split over 2 phases, and quite simply, the first phase we call phase 1, which is feasibility studies. And this is really where we want the companies, the SMEs, to lead from the ground up, and for them to say there are problems that they want to solve, but they can't do them in isolation. And we don't know actually what is out there, which is one of the reasons why we do go out with a call. But our target is we hope to support 50 feasibility studies over the next 3 to 5 years. If we get really good projects in the first 3 years, then we will fund those and bring that number forward. But the phase 1 is providing up to £60,000 to that group of companies to work with stakeholders and academia. And it is specifically to enable them to have somebody appointed as a challenge person that will help them to look at the opportunities and clarify if there is a way forward and what would that look like. But primarily for us, and the experience we've had to date, is those groupings that we've funded, those networks that we have funded, they are working on their geographical region, but we recognise we're trying to create clusters in Northern Ireland. There is an opportunity to bring those together, but we don't have all the answers. The companies have a lot of the answers. And we've also realised that with some of those projects we've funded start in one direction, but because of external market factors go off in another direction. And therefore that £60,000 is to allow them to work and scope out and develop a develop a cluster business model with the view that they may come into the programme later on to become a cluster organisation. So that funding of 60k, it can be for up to 12 months or longer than that. Our experience would say that a lot of these projects funded, previously we funded feasibility studies for 25,000, and they said they would do them in 6 months. And 18 months later, those companies are still working collectively together because they get so much from working collectively, and they wanted then to actually, they were ambitious and they wanted to do more. But in order to qualify for that feasibility study funding, we definitely are requiring 8 SMEs. This is about private sector driving the agenda. And that's why we've asked that it has to be 8 SMEs, and one of them will have to be an Invest in I client company. And it is primarily to cover the costs of that independent facilitator that they will appoint. And I'm saying primarily because there are in some instances, some other things that they asked for us to cover around maybe an external consultant as well with expertise in a particular area. I've already said that we're hoping to do 50 projects, but if we need to do them sooner than 5 years, we will. After phase 1, we are hoping that some of those projects we've funded will either start to come together and look at opportunities. One example is around the advanced manufacturing sector, because those projects we have funded for some 5 to 7 years, and because of the ambition of makers as well, there is a potential that GEMX, Mega, Mid and East Antrim, with makers and AMIC could all become that one super cluster in that space. However, we are leaving it to the process of the feasibility study, because the one thing that collaboration is that it isn't easy. And all of you will know that when you get people in a room with different agendas, different personalities, different ambitions, that can be quite challenging. And no matter how much we know, and the evidence is that there are more willingness, more trust built up over the last lot of years, and being in this job for such a long time, I would say there is definitely an appetite and a climate for people now wanting to collaborate. They realise financial resources are stretched. So we are hoping that from some of those phase 1 projects, they will start to coalesce and work together, and they will be strong enough and have a business model to come in and be part of that next round of phase 2 funding. And we got funding from the department to fund what is for 5 priority clusters, even though in the economic vision, the minister's ambition was for 7. But I think if I had gone and asked for more money, I might have got shown the door, would be the case at that particular time. But I think we're ambitious enough, and hopefully that the evidence will show that if we get some fantastic opportunities for other clusters that we haven't considered, or the department haven't considered, that we could go back to the department at another time, but that remains to be seen. But the phase 2 is to set up what we call our cluster organisations, and those are the ones that I've talked about that happen, that presented at our conference. You know, they are those that we recognise as cluster organisations in the European context and the global context. So whether, you know, it's a replicating something similar to what the Basque region done, or taking lessons from that and applying it to Northern Ireland, but it is to actually have 1 or 2 full-time people employed to actually help deliver that cluster ambition. We will not look at anything that doesn't comprise at least 20 companies, because it will not be a cluster if it has less than that as well. And we would hope that they will not just be funded by us, but that they will, as part of their sustainability plan, leverage other funding. And that is also where there's opportunities for them to tap into Horizon funding, philanthropic funding, and other investor funding. And, you know, that would be our ambition as well. If they have and are wanting to avail of funding from us, they will demonstrate that going forward. As part of our additional support around this, we are going to continue to do best practice benchmarking. So some of the groupings we've already funded and are ambitious are actually looking at, could they go out and work in partnership with the Basque region advanced manufacturing sector? Can they, and I know NEMO has already signed NDAs with the Norwegian offshore, so can they partner and work with them, and can they look at what else is best practice out there? So we're working our way through that as well. We will be continuing to do emerging workshops, we'll be continuing to do workshops for our emerging clusters, and that's just part of what the team will do. And also one of the things that we've recognised as well is there is a need for those clusters to definitely have an understanding, not just the facilitators, but the companies that are participating and the stakeholders that are participating, as what we mean by a cluster business model. And that is where they will then get the opportunity to look at, well, how will they grow? Who are the partners? What market opportunities should be pursuing? And actually what will be their cost structures and revenue streams? So it's taken the old-fashioned business model, but it is aligned to now and designed by into what we call as the cluster business model. And that's something we're hoping to roll out. We will continue to do facilitation training as well for the facilitators, but also I'm minded as well to consider who else might Invest and I want to be participating in that going forward. And we will continue to build on. There's two other things that we're involved with, and one is that we've been successful with Intertrade Ireland and Enterprise Ireland on a cluster shared island funding, and we are looking at the gaps in our programme and the gaps in Enterprise Ireland and what we can do collectively together. So we will continue to work with them and actually deliver some other training in those areas. But just thought of note, there's a couple of things that we wanted to share with you. I mentioned Mega, GEMX and Mid and East Antrim. We are saying that we will not fund those as we had funded them through the previous Collaborative Growth Programme, but we will fund those emerging clusters to do something different, and that is they have an ambition to pursue to become part of that supercluster in Northern Ireland. We also want to make sure that the objectives are aligned, and that the projects that we are funding definitely are one of the 7 priority areas. For us as well, the member companies and stakeholders, this is where there's always a bit of confusion. This is 100% funding, and it's under aid to SMEs. And a lot of the companies that sometimes come together think that they're going to get funding, but it is not. It is for those companies to appoint that independent honest broker and for them to pay that person to do the work on their behalf. And that person, that facilitator, cannot be a member of the companies, cannot be an employee of the or the member of the network cannot be an employee of the companies, and it cannot be an employee of the stakeholders. They have to remain independent. So that is critical for us as well. And as I said earlier, the funds are for the facilitator, but also some of them as well can be used for some marketing. And that good old thing that some of us is around, it is not de minimis funding as well. So for us, criteria, most of the phase ones have to consist of 8 SMEs. One of them has to be an Invest in I client company. And we would want to see as well representatives from the academic institutions, from investors, from public sector organisations heavily involved in those going forward. Our targets are slightly ambitious, I would say, as well, in terms of the funding and the leverage of funding. But over the period of time, that we're hoping that we will create 934 new jobs as a result of the work that we do. And we hope that we will leverage at least £22 million fund. Now, considering the previous programme of 3.2 million investment, leverage 36, I think I'm hoping that will be deliverable. Just quickly, in terms of how you apply, we've closed an annual call. So our call for 2025, we're hoping to go out in April. You can make sure that your clients will know that the applications will be online by the portal. There needs to be the lead company who will actually be the person who will submit the application on behalf of that group. And one key thing as well is to be aware of that the lead company needs to have a good cash flow, because they are the person that will be funding the facilitator or customer manager. And I am delighted as well to say that we've had a lot of volunteers from across the organisation to help us to assess the first cohort of applications. And we have a team set up and series of those assessment panels set up for a week from now as well, or 2 weeks from now. And we will also be engaging with the client executives to make sure that the lead company is viable, and therefore, as part of the casework to approve those, we will ask the client executive to contribute to that. The other thing that's highlighted to me recently, and it was a conversation Eugene and Sharon and I had, the applications have so many stakeholders and companies on them. We don't ordinarily go out and inform you all of who all these companies are that are involved in these potential applications. But I think a very valid point was that actually it's really useful for the client executives to be aware of who all the companies are at the start of a project that we're funding. And we are working with Josh and the CRM system to find out how we can make sure we collect all that data, because these are organic and they do not stand still. So, when we start some of these projects, I may start with 8, but make an example of when we started with 4 companies. So, I keeping tabs on that is going to be key, and making sure that the client executives as well are aware of all those companies if they're involved in any of those projects. So I really appreciate that feedback. And also in terms of how you apply, really, again, in terms of the application lengthy, really, on the scheme of things. There's 3 main sections really in it. 750 words are required to outline the project that you want to work collectively on for one. That's not for phase 2, for phase 1. Really, there's a table there. We want you to demonstrate SMART objectives. Those will form part of your letter of offer. We want to understand what might be the risk of the project and mindful of how we might mitigate against that, because that will inform our case. And we just want to know what the costs are. It's not war and peace. So, so we have just closed the call, as I said, with 16 applications. Those 16 applications at the minute represent about 110 SMEs. and some 90 stakeholders. We hope if we fund even 10 of those, that will grow as evidence has before. Some of the stakeholders involved, those links with City and Growth Deal, AMIC, the catapults, investor organisations. I haven't put all the names of all the projects up there, but they range across low carbon, software and AI, the agri-tech and clean tech sector, and advanced manufacturing. So, we will be assessing those, as I say. In terms of other, then I did mention these 2 projects, and the only thing I want to bring to your attention as well is that we've worked across the organisation in 2 of these opportunities. Well, the Peace Plus bid that we put in, which is linked in with Scottish Enterprise, Skillnet, AMIC, Manufacturing Research and A2U. We're hoping to hear about that in March, April, Paul. But there's a big element of clusters in that, but also that we would not have done that application or been successful in actually getting that application if it hadn't been for colleagues in this organisation, Paul and Clive and John. It was a real collaborative effort to get that in, but there's a big element of that around clusters, and especially in terms of advanced manufacturing. And then in Shared Island, we are, as I say, working on delivering a programme for it, but we have an ambitious conference coming up in October, and we are attracting the Global Competitiveness Institute conference. We collectively secured the tender to bring that to the island of Ireland. So I would hope that some of you will be able to participate in that. It is a 3-day event, and there will be global practitioners and world experts speaking at that over 3 days. And we also have one of those days to showcase what we're doing in Northern Ireland, and we're hoping to showcase both the advanced manufacturing and maritime sectors. So I will be reaching out to some of you for that. So that, I'm sorry, folks, took, well, 1 hour. So I thought it'd be useful as well just to find out thoughts and any questions that you have, because I would like to know what else could we do to help you do your job better, and how can we get you more involved as well with the delivery of the programme. So any questions, thoughts?
You mentioned 5, possibly 7 priority areas. What are those exactly? 5 or 7.
The Minister has in the economic strategy document referenced 7. Somebody else is going to correct me here, but advanced manufacturing is one, life science is one, agri-tech, there's no surprises in these. Agri-tech's one, I'm looking at green power now. What's great? Decarbonisation, and I've missed one.
Priority sectors.
So there, yeah. So, but this is back to the fact of sectors and clusters, and also from the point of view that actually these have to be driven from the company's needs, wants, problems they're having to solve, and the external market forces. And things can change, as we all know, in a business model instantly. So we know from previously, when working with some of our other groups, that point I made, they may have started, but they pivoted and they ended up going to do something else. That's one of the reasons the feasibility study is so important, and that evidence base to help inform what are those priority clusters that we will be looking at.
And I have a question.
Yeah, Rachel.
A brilliant program, Linda. Just a question on the sequencing of phase 1 and phase 2. So at the moment, your calls are going out for phase 1, and when do you expect calls to go out for phase 2?
In our business, case, we had planned it probably in the second half of year 2, because we would hope that we would have sufficient evidence from those phase 1 applications that there would, if we go out with a call for that, and actually what I'm to say is phase 2 is £1 million per cluster, up to £1 million per cluster over 5 years. And so that would be a competitive call. We hope that phase that is collated through the phase will inform that, and we'll bid for the first one that we go out with. Second half probably of year 2.
Okay. And then in terms of currently being on phase 1, it's competitive as well, and how you're scoring it?
Yeah, it is. One is competitive. We're hoping minimum of 10.
Perfect. That's me.
And the reason as well, Rachel, actually why we've put it out as a competitive call and have a deadline, and I'm not responding to previously companies ringing and going, can we have another month or can we do? It's because the way we're trying to train everybody up at the same time, and we want to roll out a program that actually is going to support them as they evolve and that they can share lessons across each other. Yeah. Any other questions? I've just bored everybody. No? Thank you. I mean, honestly, folks, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity. I really do appreciate you taking time to put down your thoughts on the paper, because that will help us as well to look at. And if there is anything else that you would like more information on, or you want to follow up with us, you can contact any one of the team. Happy to engage with you in whatever shape or form. So thank you. Have a nice day.